Dialogues is a format which Vidhi has been holding for more than a year, and we've had previous speakers have included Arvind Datar and many distinguished speakers. And today we have got a distinguished panel of speakers for this event. So let me briefly introduce this thing. We are also releasing a report on money and elections, necessary reforms in electoral finance. After this event, there will be copies available at the desk. So let me briefly introduce the speakers. Dr. Quraishi is a former Chief Election Commissioner of India. He's authored a book on elections called An Undocumented Wonder, the Making of the Great Indian Election, which describes the enormity and complexity of the Indian election. He's also, a professor. He's been teaching, and he holds a doctorate. All the three panelists actually hold a doctorate, and the second speaker will be Professor Rajeev Gowda. He's an MP in the Rajya Sabha, and we have called him here because he's also a professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Used to be, and he has written on this topic of electoral finance reforms, and we used his article as a starting point for many of the topics in our briefing book. This was third speaker, Dr. Aditya Sondhi, who's the Additional Advocate General of Karnataka, the Senior Advocate and Additional Advocate General of Karnataka. He is also a doctorate in a very interesting topic, which is army and democracy, the relationship between these things. He holds a doctorate in this. So, without much further ado, I'll ask Dr. Sondhi to open with his remarks for about 10 minutes, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Sushil. I did think through the topic, and I thought I would begin by putting out a few thoughts on the subject. Now look, we live in an era of crowdfunding, and in that sense, if elections can be crowdfunded, I think in principle that's a welcome trend. Having said that, there is a certain impetus that has to remain on transparency and clean money in elections. We talk constantly about free and fair elections, and if you read Dr. Quraishi's book and followed the work of the Election Commission, you will see that our elections are a formidable process, and to a very, very large extent, they are free and they are fair. But the third emphasis which needs to be given is that they should be free, fair and clean. And a very integral part of a clean election is the utilization of electoral funds. And as you know, misutilization of funds leads to corrupt practices which can lead to disqualification, etc., etc. But I think what we're talking about here is not so much individual abuse of money, but more the concept of funding of political parties themselves. And therefore, I think when we talk about transparency in funding of elections, the emphasis must remain on disclosure. Now, when we look at public interest litigations, for example, that are filed in the Supreme Court, those of you who practice here will know that one of the mandatory requirements under the rules of practice is that when a PIL is filed, the source of funds must be made known. And I think that's a very important rule to have in the statute book, because what it does is it calls the bluff of proxy litigation. You won't be surprised at all to know that a great amount of public interest litigation is set up. It's set up politically, it's set up for publicity, it's set up for private interest, and that just runs counter to the very purpose of public interest litigations. And the requirement of a disclosure there is something that goes to the root of transparency and enables a system to deal with bona fide cases and provides a certain amount of purity to the system. That's something people are talking about today in the context of international arbitration. We're talking about third-party funding of arbitrations, and those who resist it are resisting it simply because this is often anonymous. And if it's anonymous, then it creates a certain question mark on the bona fides of the process. And if these questions are being asked in civil disputes, in arbitrations, in public interest litigations, I think these questions need to be asked exponentially more when dealing with something as important as funding of elections, because that goes to the very root of your democratic process. And if that is the case, the recent move of the government to introduce electoral bonds, which are essentially anonymous funding of elections, though with a slight sophistication built into them, this is something that I think should be very critically looked at by all of us. The Indian regime hitherto was that any contribution in excess of 20,000 rupees had to be by a bank instrument, and therefore disclosure would be mandatory. And the knowledge of the source of funding is crucial to this process. There was an interesting episode in the UK, because the UK has a mix of private funding and state funding of elections. And one of the modes of raising funds for elections in the UK is through membership, through basically subscription fee to become members of, say, Labour or the other side. And there was a very interesting development when Jeremy Corbyn was elected as the leader of the opposition. And I've heard this from friends in the UK. And they talked about cases where people simply signed up to sabotage the entire process. They became members of the Labour Party by paying a nominal fee. And in the process, people felt voting in somebody who would not be a strong enough leader. You look at it now, you may say, look, his popularity has increased, his stand on Brexit was vindicated, etc. But there is a school of thought which maintained that even in the UK, the system got carried away with the carrot at the end of the stick, that you're getting a bit of funding through membership, you don't vet it, it could be anonymous, and it could be your own political rivals who are sabotaging an election by simply becoming proxy members of your party and eating you within. And therefore, I think in India, this discussion about disclosure of identity in funding is crucial. And that conversation needs to go on. The other aspect I wanted to talk to you about was the spending of the money. I think any conversation on electoral funding cannot begin and end with the funding itself. It has to do also a great deal with the manner in which those funds are utilized, right? You can say that you want to reform cricket and introduce corporate funding, that's fine. But if corporate funding is then used to fix matches, then there's an inherent problem in your model. And I think that analogy is not entirely out of place if you talk about elections in India. You talk about corporate funding itself today, right? There is a school of thought that the decision to support a political party by a corporation should not be taken at a board level, but should be taken at a general body level. I think that's a very healthy sort of direction to move in. If you're talking about democracy and the involvement of people at large, then why should not the corporate entities supporting an election apply the same democratic process to come to a decision by majority as to whether a political party should be supported or not? And I think that brings a lot more purity to the system. Application of funds. We have taken for granted that funding of, tell me when I should stop. Application of funds, we emphasize a great deal on the spending of money towards campaign finance. Of course, that's a given. But do we talk enough about application of electoral funds towards manifesto promises? Who funds manifesto promises? It's the public exchequer. Once you come into power, you don't dip into your political party's resources to make good those promises. You may not even be able to, because we're talking about budgetary allocations, we're talking sometimes about thousands of crores. But can we raise the question, can we argue that there is room to have a mandate, or even if not a mandate, at least a good practice of governance, that some part of the corpus of a political party will be set aside to make good its manifesto promises? It's just a bona fide gesture. I think it's not the money, but it's more the impression that is conveyed to the public at large that these funds are being well utilized. If that is the debate that we're moving towards, how do you then fit in a regime of opacity? How do you then fit in a regime where disclosures are not mandatory? How do you justify political parties remaining outside of the RTI, for example? Is that not a bizarre development the Chief Information Commissioner ordered that political parties are indeed covered by the RTI. And if you read that order at prima facie reading, it's a very acceptable argument. That you may not be public bodies per se, but you are certainly funded sufficiently or supported sufficiently by the state by means of land, concessions, tax rebates, etc., to bring you within the regime of the RTI Act. After all, today clubs are brought under the RTI Act. Why not political parties? They are at the center of your democratic process. And what did we do? We moved to amend the law. This CIC judgment was not even tested in the High Court or the Supreme Court. That's how bizarre it is. You normally talk about legislative overruling of judgments when they assume finality in the Supreme Court. This was a case where at a CIC level, the cat was amongst the pigeons and amendments were mooted. So I think any conversation that deals with electoral funding has to have at its core disclosure, transparency, good governance practices. I don't think we need to emphasize too much on the law. If you look at the march of the law, the march has been in reverse in many senses, right? The reaction to RTI, the introduction of electoral bonds, these are not necessarily steps in the right direction in my opinion. And when the steps have been taken, they've been nudged by the courts. If you look at the history of electoral reform dealing with electoral finance, it's always by and large been the outcome of a decision of a Supreme Court or a High Court. And this is not just the case here, it's the case worldwide. And therefore, friends, I think I'll stop here simply by saying that this is a very important conversation that Vidhi has started, and I think that the discourse needs to be taken forward, and the emphasis, in my opinion, should be on the purity of the electoral process.
Thank you, Dr. Sondhi. Actually, these are some things we have discussed in our report. We used starting point as electoral bonds and electoral trusts and anonymity, where everywhere else in democracies we've been moving from anonymity to disclosure. We seem to be moving. And another point you made was that all legislative reforms since 1969 have been for protecting either the incumbents in office or to protect anonymity of the donors. And another interesting fact is that most of the committees there have been many committees which have discussed all the options about electoral reforms, and they've mostly been appointed by minority governments. They've been in periods when there was a minority government in power at the center. So with that, can I ask Professor Gowda to take?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I have a PPT actually.
I said I was a professor. Well, the PPT side of me has not left me. So we have a presentation here on electoral reforms, on very, very practical perspectives on electoral reforms. I'd like to acknowledge my co-author Varun Santosh there in the corner. So there you go. Okay. So actually, just following up on what Aditya Sondhi mentioned, he did talk about the need to have free, fair, and clean elections. I also want a process that is accessible to everyone. And that's one part of what is driving this whole process. And the other fact that I'd like to mention is that a lot of these insights came from being someone who was trying to break into the electoral process myself. All right, and discovering how complicated the electoral financing and expenditure laws are, discovering how the system has essentially been hijacked by fairly wealthy participants. And so that's really some of the context from where I'm coming. So let's just talk about electoral laws. Our thesis is that these are flawed. That India is basically in a state of denial about the realities of running a democracy, or at least the electoral process part of it, and that you've ended up yielding space to a politician, contractor, voter buying nexus. Things have deteriorated tremendously. The electoral bonds process, the finance bill last year, etc., in our view, is not a step in the right direction. And we will end on a more positive note by suggesting in a very concrete way how public funding, how all of us can play some role in turning these things around. So when I say let's take a first step in a very practical way, who participates in party politics? right? Many of us want to be politicians, perhaps, and make a difference to the country. But so they would fall in the first category, people motivated by public service. And then it could be people motivated by private ambition. Nothing wrong with that. People want to be notable and famous. People who have the time to devote. So that's actually a very practical point. Not everyone has the time or the resources to be able to compete. But a larger number of people are coming in who see politics as a way to enrich themselves. And over time, we've sort of developed a patronage system. You know, the theory of our electoral reforms discourse and the actual practical reality of what goes on within political parties is something very, very different. And there are, often parties are personal fiefdoms, and there is a whole circle of essentially a patronage system of godfathers and people below, and that's something that we need to pay attention to. Okay. This is partly highlighted by this quotation from Raghuram Rajan, where he says that the crooked politician needs the businessman to provide the funds that allow him to supply patronage to the poor and to fight elections. The corrupt businessman needs the crooked politician to get public resources and contracts cheaply. And the politician needs the votes of the poor and the underprivileged. Every constituency is tied to the other in a cycle of dependence, which ensures that the status quo prevails. So this is basically like what in some other contexts is called an iron triangle. You know, everyone is happily wedged with one another and scratching each other's backs, and it's very difficult to break out of this kind of an negative equilibrium in some sense. Okay, and Pratap Bhanumehta argues that the government is a government of contractors, by contractors, for contractors. I have nothing against contractors per se; they have a useful role in society. But in democracy, I think we don't want them rigging the whole process. Anyway, the basic argument is that we have, and the roots of change are also embedded in this statement, right? We have created laws which have had a negative impact, have had a counterproductive effect, and which have triggered large-scale, top-down, bottom-up corruption in the system, not just in the political system, in the overall governance system. All right. So if we have come up with laws that have counterproductive results, then the onus is upon us to change those laws to try and turn the trajectory of the whole process in a different direction. So, but how did these laws come about? The very first part is that we don't recognize the realities of politics. I told you that the earlier slide was about who comes into politics. This is about what does it take to be in politics, right? So you want a healthy democracy, everyone will put their hands up, right? Free, fair, clean, etc. Yes, wonderful, okay? But for that, you also need vibrant political parties. You need vigorously competitive election campaigns, right? These are absolute necessities for the health of democracies. And will these happen without significant resources? No. You need huge amounts of resources to be able to communicate your message, galvanize support, and come in with a mandate to make a difference. So resources are very, very central to the whole exercise. And ideally, we want them to be raised and spent transparently. There's no problem with that. We don't want people and parties to be dependent on single sources, to be in the pocket of some industrialist or some other entity. All right? And we want a level playing field, right? But basically, the denial is that politics costs, that democracies cost a lot of money, all right? We are also in denial about what it costs to be a politician, right? So I recall about a few years ago, during the UPA time, the salary of an MP was raised from 16,000 rupees to 50,000 rupees a month, which is what it is today. Okay, well, there are a few other perks, but the basic point is that cash is fairly limited for those of us who earn that salary. And what shall we say? There was a huge furor. People were like 300% increase in salary, right? How many of you are willing to work for that 16,000 rupees a month, right? Okay, and how will you be able to sustain an MP's office and everything else that goes with doing proper service delivery to your constituents, right? So those sorts of questions. So what we've come up with are fairly complex expenditure, funding, and reporting and disclosure laws. And these essentially have created a dependence on black money and triggered extensive corruption in the system. All right. So where does this come from? The first point, of course, is this, what I call the farce of election expenditure limits. Right? Okay. So, the limit was raised again during UPA years from 40 lakhs for a Lok Sabha seat to 70 lakhs or something like that. Right? And now, basically, what happens is that everyone spends a lot more money, and when it comes time to providing a report to Dr. Quraishi, they will say, "Oh no, we spent much less." Okay, and so basically, as far as the official fund, calculations are, it shows that much less than 70 lakhs was typically spent, because if you spend more than that, you can be disqualified. Your election is gone, right? And so what is the end result of this? This statement by our former Prime Minister saying that every MP begins his career with a lie, right? Is this what we want? Are lawmakers to begin their career with the lie of a false account of expenditures for that election? Well, that's what we've created for ourselves. Why? Because we are, idealistic people who want elections to be low cost so that more people in the common man can take part, etc. But the truth and the reality is it costs much more. So if you can't declare it because the limit comes in the way, what do? You spend it in cash, you spend it in black, you spend it underground, and as a result, it's not visible to on official records, but it's driving that expenditure underground. And a lot of the work that happens at election time by the Election Commission is about policing overt expenditures. How many cars in this entourage? How much might have been spent on this political rally? When, in fact, because they can't spend on these kinds of overt expenditures, politicians are resorting to, cash payments to voters and things of that sort. Okay, and the late Gopinath Munde made this statement. Okay, where he said when he first started in 1980, he spent 9,000 rupees, while in 2009 he spent 8 crores. And in that photo, he actually says, even if there is someone from the Election Commission listening, I don't care, he says. Okay? Basically, the point is, come on, let's get real. Okay. This has also resulted in a situation where criminals find it much easier to break into the system. All right, because they have networks, they have resources, etc. And so, you have some 1/3 of MPs facing significant, or facing a criminal case, and 1/5 are serious cases. These are very, very ugly kinds of crimes, and it's sad that we have such people out there. But why are criminals successful? Milad Vaishnav has a whole book on this subject, where he says elections are getting very costly. Parties don't have that much money. So they look for self-financing candidates who have money, have networks, and are able to pull off an election campaign. And many parties don't have candidates everywhere. So if someone shows up and says, I will run in this remote location and win the seat for you, they say, sure, fine. If you win, fine, we've got an extra MP, something like that. Then, of course, there are all these other systems that get established. In Karnataka, for the longest time, the liquor lobby was very, very powerful. And basically, the way it works is, when a bottle has to leave from the factory, one of the ways is they have to pay excise duty, right? And that's how it's sold in the marketplace with a little excise sticker at a particular price. Now, if many trucks go out without paying excise duty, but with a false sticker, then there's a lot of cash that should have been tax revenue that is left with the players in this game. And that cash ended up being used to fund politicians, etc., and political parties, and the liquor lobby became very, very powerful. They would also declare something else called seconds liquor as not eligible for sale, but then they would sell that as well. So there were lots of games that took place in this neighborhood of powerful liquor baron called Ponti Chadda, you might have heard of, who was shot in killed in a gunfight with his brother, but they were all people who were regarded as mega players in the political domain because of their resources. What's happening is that money should have been ours in the exchequer. It remained with the liquor barons, and they used that to buy influence and possibly to get in. Similarly, sort of mega projects that have turned NPA, a lot of them have used political clout to get their, get their resources, etc. And you find this everywhere. Lots of examples. If you come to Bengaluru and see potholed roads and wonder why, I thought the road was repaired a year ago or something like that. Roads are designed to deteriorate every year because every year there'll be a new contract and a new set of kickbacks, and this is one of the ways in which some of the funds flow into the political process. Okay, and mining, again, Karnataka boasts the Reddy brothers and others who are well known, and typically they would be allocated as a particular plot of land as their official mining area, but they would happily mine in areas beyond, including in forest land. So essentially a lot of that wealth was our wealth, which belonged to all of us, which they ended up cornering. Here's Dr. Quraishi's book about the Great Indian Election, and where he talks about the many ways in which the guidelines of the Election Commission are circumvented, how cash is somehow distributed to people, etc. And I have one story that I'd like to mention. One election commissioner in Karnataka told me about this, about a candidate who was distributing a single earring to women, saying that when I win, I will give you the matching pair. Okay, so this is what we call incentive compatible. Not only will this person campaign for this guy, vote for this guy, but will also campaign because, if he wins, it's good, that sort of thing. So this kind of creativity you see in the political process, okay? Another extremely creative gentleman is Mr. Jaitley, who has come up with this statement that electoral bonds are actually going to improve things. See, one of the problems, there's an article on electoral reforms by Sridharan and me in something called Election Law Journal, which has been cited considerably. And that one, we talk about how even if corporate and individual donations are legal and can be given by check, most people prefer anonymity, just because they don't want retaliation if the party they backed did not win the election, if somebody else came in. And so Mr. Jaitley is hitting on this particular angle about anonymity and saying that electoral bonds will be anonymous. You won't know, who gave this bond to the political party. And since there's other concern that black money gets funneled into the system, he says these have to be bought through a bank instrument, cash, DD, something like that. Now, we just are getting over the great demonetization policy move, and one of the things that demonetization showed us is that the banking system is also vulnerable to corruption, right? That if enough people were able to convert, essentially cash to bank accounts, to white money, and very few were actually apprehended. And so basically, if he says that if the banking system will ensure that cash is kept out, I don't believe it. Okay, there have been enough instances of illegal money coming in through the banking system. So the bonds problem is that. So even if it says it's a banking instrument, it could still be illegal cash, black money. And the second thing is, when that is donated to political parties, only the party will know who gave that donation. You and I won't know. So that issue of transparency, of following the money, seeing who is trying to influence whom, that goes for a toss. Basically, we'll never be able to accuse the ruling party of, say, getting a lot of money from particular sources, from their favorite friends or something like that, or someone who's benefited from their policies. Now, Mr. Jaitley says that's fine. Nobody will know, and therefore, it incentivizes people to contribute. But the government is in an advantageous position. There's asymmetric advantage for the government because the government is the boss over, Mr. Jaitley is the boss over SBI and everyone else. And if he, with a little wink and a nudge here and there, he should be able to find out who contributed where. And therefore would also be in a position to strong arm companies and donors to donate to his side and things of that sort. So there is a potential problem, and that's something that I'm concerned about. Okay, so that's the story about electoral bonds. They don't, and then the other one or two things that were snuck into this finance bill. Previously, 20,000 and above were supposed to be officially declared. Okay, even that was being, the people would make numerous 19,000 plus donations, and so you'd never know the source of this funding. And so most political parties have 85% of their funds from these unknown sources. Unknown meaning below 20,000 typically. Now, basically, he removed that and brought it down to 2,000, but it just means a little more paperwork. Okay. The other part is, which is more worrisome, previously you needed a board resolution or board approval before a company could donate, and now that's gone. Previously, a company could donate only up to a cap of, I think, 5% of 7.5%. Yeah, no, I see that, but I was confused there. 7.5% of your last 3 years' profits, and both of these are gone. So now companies can be created and then they can disappear. Electoral bonds fail the test of clean money, transparency, and fairness as well. So how do we go ahead? All right. Well, if you look around the world, often the emphasis is on strengthening disclosure. Everyone wants to know who's paying whom. And of course, expanding public funding. When all of us want something, but none of us is willing to voluntarily contribute, what government's device is a taxation system and use those resources for that purpose. Well, similarly, we all want a clean, vibrant electoral process, a good, healthy democracy, but we're not willing to voluntarily contribute. So what we suggest is a national election fund, and this would have essentially two components, and that is, you reward parties with some amount of resources based on their vote share in the previous election. Because this is historical and doesn't help parties that are emerging, so what we suggest is, if any party's got at least 2% of the vote in the previous election, from this National Election Fund, we'll give 50 rupees per eligible vote. This is to be spent at two parts. One goes to the central party, one goes to the constituency level. If you are able to raise contributions through checks and PAN numbers and Aadhaar, if you want, basically you should be in a position to, the government will match that or at least this National Election Fund will match that to a certain extent as well. Now, what does this do? This will allow someone with diffuse support to also be able to raise enough resources to play the game. All right? And so basically then many of these other problems that we have, RTI not applicable to political parties, all those, the excuses for that will go away because you're now taking public funding. You should be subject to scrutiny. After all, parties really have a problem with RTI not on the funding part, but on whether everything else that they do will be, subject to disclosure. And of course, we'll try and police the same problem of cash being routed through 2,000 rupees donations below 2,000 or below 20,000 could also be a problem in this, mass fundraising. But so we'll have to find ways of sort of making sure that that doesn't happen. And then we should also have a sort of parliamentary oversight over these funds, etc. Now, how much will this cost, you might ask, right? I point out that it actually costs maybe a quarter of what it costs to run the MP Lads funds programs, where, and so it's not that much at all on an annual basis. And since, we all know that we're the fastest growing economy in the world and, Aceh Din have already come and gone, basically, this should be a small change for a nation of our size if it can clean up the political process and level the playing field. So that's really what we are emphasizing. One or two other factors, media spend, amount spent on media needs to be monitored, and because that is visible. You know how many ads have come out, and what kind of expenditure has been spent on that, because otherwise, that's this thing. The second point is this election expenditure limit should either be made spectacularly high or gotten rid of altogether. It's just diverting all our time and attention to to evading that rule, and it's in our view quite pointless. transparency in media spend. Anyway, so the basic idea is that if you bring in this kind of initiative and this the other concomitant changes in the way electoral laws are come up with expenditure limits and how much you track on media spend, etc., we will be able to change the game. And we will be able to usher in a more competitive, free, fair, and clean electoral process, like Dr. Sondhi pointed out. So we can take questions later. Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I agree with whatever has been said, and we are on this exactly the same page. When I took over as CEC in 30th of July 2010, in my inaugural press conference, I gave myself two challenges. I said I'll run after the black money in election, money power in elections, and I'll also handle the voter apathy. The turnout used to be in metros and big towns, used to be 20-25%. In the second, we achieved remarkable success. We set up a voter education division, we started National Voters Day, and every election after that has given us the higher turnouts. In the second, we set up an expenditure monitoring division where we brought in somebody from the income tax department, a commissioner, to set up guidelines and for full infrastructure to be able to look at the problem around the year. Otherwise, the practice was that during the election, we'll call joint secretary level officers of income tax department to be our election observers, expenditure observers. They'll do their job for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, give their report and go home. There was no follow-up. There was no, we were not equipped to follow up. But that we took care of by setting. In fact, Madam sitting right in front, she was my first candidate, but she was too senior. So her department refused to part with that senior an officer. And we had a younger officer. Initially, we had great success, although Bihar was the first election, but money was not the issue there. My focus was more on what was to follow next year in 4 months in Tamil Nadu, because that is where the maximum money used to play a role. Initially, we had great success. Later on, and in my book, which Rajeev mentioned in his presentation, An Undocumented Wonder, there's a chapter on money power, and where I have listed 40 modus operandi of abuse of money power. And 40 is the list which we had discovered till then. There must have been many more, and now many more obviously have been. They are very ingenious people. But the biggest reform surely they have done is, now the money reaches the destination before the election commission comes into the picture. Because once we are in the picture, we start raiding hotels and resorts and here, there, buses, helicopters, everything. Even 50,000 rupees movement is very, very difficult. But that's why the money reaches the money lender in the village, or the fair price shop, or the liquor vendor, or what have you, so that there is no movement of money to catch. And then they have a very interesting modus operandi. How in Ludhiana, for instance, they will give you a slip, half a slip. One half is with the vendor, the other half is given to you. When you go there, he'll match, and that will show how many bottles have to be given to him. So there's no money. What do we catch? But we came across such things. Also, they came up with such ingenious ideas to bribe the voters. The bribing voters is banned, but biryani party and liquor party is very, very common. In fact, one of our observers once observed a huge wedding going on, and where liquor was flowing and chicken was flying. So, maybe he was a very polite guy. He thought while he is there, why doesn't he go and congratulate the bride and bridegroom? There was no bride or bridegroom. That we are smart and we have solved the problem, we will be stupid. Because now also there will be a bogus wedding, but there will be a bride and bridegroom both rented. Right. There will be a wedding card, bogus printed wedding card, all proof that this is a genuine wedding, but still it is nothing but a ploy to bribe the voters. we discover that all the Mundan ceremonies and birthdays and all kinds of family functions suddenly start happening around the election time. Of course, we keep an eye on all the banquet halls, all the places where these parties will take place. But they come up with innovative ideas, and as I said, the first thing is the money already has reached the destination. What to do? Oh, that is our problem. Ever since we remember, the problem of black money in election has been discussed. If you look at the parliamentary history, several begin Goswami committee onward, for the last 40 years, committees have been formed to deal with this issue. They all talk of this problem, and one solution with the closest they came was in 1999, when Indrajit Gupta committee said that yes, there is black money, yes, it needs to be checked, and perhaps the best way will be to do public funding or state funding of elections, provided there is internal democracy. Now that provided never happened because there is no internal democracy. The president and the other office bearers are just decided by the High Command or a portfolio of people. As a result, officially, no action was taken on the Indrajit Gupta committee report. We have been trying to build on this. I had recommended, not in my time, because till then I had not come to this conclusion. Just after demitting charge, I decided to recommend, which Rajeev referred to also, is state funding of political parties. Not of elections, but political parties. Every time I talk about it, I make it clear that I'm not talking about funding of elections, because that is impossible to monitor. There is a limit already for Vidhan Sabha 28 lakhs, Lok Sabha 70 lakhs. Anecdotally, we know that 10 times, 20 times, 100 times more money is being spent. How do we catch? It's all black money and being distributed in kind, in form of liquor, and why even cash? Envelopes slipped under your door. All that keeps happening. So state funding of election is impossible. That will only mean, after all, 28 lakhs is official for MLA. Even if I write a check of 28 lakhs for you, but the 10 crores which you were spending already, that will not suddenly disappear. They will not become saints. This 28 lakhs will only supplement good money, bad money. Our good money will go to supplement the bad money. My suggestion was that let us fund the political parties based on their actual performance. For every vote, if you give 50 rupees, I mentioned 100 rupees or 50, actually both for formulation for good reason. Now, last general election, 55 crore votes were cast. If you give 100 rupees per vote, and this is on the presumption that there will be only one election in 5 years, and 50 rupees if there are 2 elections, so every time you get the money. So both figures mean exactly the same thing. Now, at 100 rupees per vote, 55 crores vote cast, how much money do we collect? 5,500 crores. We give it to them with grace, with a check. Now, no arm twisting required, no corruption required, no foul means required, you get it gracefully. Now, question will be, is 5,500 crores enough? Yes, it is enough. How do we say that? Because when we asked all political parties to tell us what did you collect in the last 5 years, they said 4,000 crores. Now, if with all hook and crook and everything and Bemani, Lootmar, everything, if they've collected 4,000 crores, so, and with their running elections, so if we give them 5,500 crores, obviously this amount is enough. So that is the formulation. Of course, people ask, now what about a new party? But why a new party can wait? First let them prove themselves. After all, when you start a new business, you first invest your own money. Aam Aadmi Party, they were first timers and they did a great job. They would have achieved their credibility. So therefore, post-election, now one figure which cannot be fudged, any other figure in accounting can be fudged. One figure which cannot be fudged is the number of votes that you have got. If you got 50 votes, you have got 50 votes. And some people said, what about independent? I said, doesn't matter. Of course, we can go into detail. We can have a fine scheme. But even if you get one vote, I take 100 rupees, go home happily, so it's fine. Because I'm accounting for all 55 crore votes. So it doesn't matter. So you have to earn your money. Now, if the new party has to be given, we can fine tune it with some money can be given in advance also. Fine tune, but first they have to accept it in principle. Now here is a scheme which is offering them money, not trying to take anything from them, and they are not even looking at this proposal. It has been around for the last 4 years. Why? Because they actually thrive in the kind of confusion which currently prevails. Because once it is public funding, it will be audited. It will be audited by CAG, and CAG is one person they hate. Some parties hate, some love him. So, but basically, if it is public money, it will have to be audited. And either CAG or from a panel of auditors given by him, so that we know exactly what's happening. But that is what political parties don't want. Because you know what they are doing, to whom they give the money, what expenditure, what income, they want to keep it a secret. And auditing is done, even now it is done, annually it is done by their own auditors who are their party card holders. Now party card holder auditor will never give a fair account. He will only whitewash and will present to you only a very nice picture. That needs to change. I don't know why they not being looked at. When I heard the budget speech, I was on television, I watched the thing. The opening lines of the finance minister were music to my ears. What did he say? He said that for the last 70 years we have been trying to achieve political transparency of political funding, and we have failed. And without transparency of political funding, free and fair elections are not possible. Now, if free and fair elections are not possible without transparency, one expected that now he is going to bring in transparency. Instead, what did he bring? What Professor Gowda pointed out to you, total opposite. Whatever transparency existed has gone for a 6. Earlier, any donation of over 20,000, less than 20,000 was converted into cash, as he said, 19,999 rupees. But anything about 20,000 was brought before the Election Commission as a disclosure. Now nothing will come to us. Of course, what he has achieved is just a little bit, that earlier the money used to change hands in cash, which could be black money, which surely was black money. Now you will have to buy a bond, which means the money has come into, it has become white, and white money in the form of bonds will be given to the party. But in the name of transparency, the people will not know which party has given, which company has given to which party. Because according to finance minister, donor wants secrecy. Now donor wants secrecy, public wants transparency. Now whose interest are you serving? And why does donor want secrecy? It is true that donor wants secrecy because there was a report of CII in 2015. And in which they said that it should be kept secret because the other political parties come and harass us. We know factually that is wrong. Reality is that corporations and the companies are very smart, very clever. They donate to every party. Whosoever wins, they are the winner because they have given it to every party. Secondly, I would like to ask BJP. Have you say that if funds are given to Congress, other party will come and harass the company? I would ask BJP, have you ever harassed the donor? Never. So parties know that this donor is giving to everybody, and they are quite okay with this. And nobody, if the BJP has been harassing, then one can expect that the Congress will also harass, other parties will also harass. That harassment doesn't actually happen. Everyone knows that these guys have to survive in business, they do donate to everywhere. In fact, it's a pity that the one very beautiful model which was getting created, Aam Aadmi Party model, which I have praised in my book also. Here was a party which said that every rupee which comes to me or which I spend will be in the public domain. They were very happy, and in fact, I talked about it globally, and globally, on my recommendation, these guys were invited to make their presentation because this is a problem which is a world problem. Now you will find on the website this list is missing. When I tweeted about this, somebody said, Mr. Quraishi, what are you talking about? Aam Aadmi Party list has disappeared. Now, when I checked with the Aam Aadmi Party, why the hell has your list disappeared, which I have been praising? He says it has disappeared because everyone in our donors list was raided by the Income Tax and Enforcement Directorate. Now the harassment actually began. Now the donor safety came into question, and they have removed it from the website, and a very beautiful model which was coming up has been killed. Just for political gain, national interests can go to hell. That seems to be the policy. Talking of model, I had come across a very beautiful model in Mizoram. In Mizoram, all kinds of campaigning is banned. 40 church organizations came together and they said there will be no door-to-door campaign, no mass campaign, no media, only street corner meeting. All candidates will come on the street corner, and people will come with a notebook, write down notes, everybody's comparative promises, and then decide. The cheapest and the most peaceful place to fight election is Mizoram. Maybe we should look at that, maybe we should publicize that. Some of you who are doing research, we pick it up as a dissertation topic, go and study. In between, Finance Minister kept on offering swaps. He first invited, and I heard this, including his speech in Rajya Sabha, that I would invite all political parties and everybody else to write to me suggesting a better model. I don't know whether people send better model or not. Even now, when finally this scheme was introduced last month, he said that I'm still open to the idea of improvement. Please send me suggestions for improvement. I hope some improvement will take place. But currently, what has been created is a disaster, and it definitely kills whatever transparency there was. And I am very sorry to confess that although Indian Election Commission has come a long way, we have improved the electoral system beyond recognition, but one place where we have failed is political funding of election and electoral finance reform. We have failed, so hope someday better sense will prevail. But I think I will stop at this, and maybe we can answer some questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
The US, we follow everything of the US. Why don't we follow the pattern of the US elections? Give them dinner, let the MNCs pay money for the dinner hosting and go and attend that lecture talk of that person who's fighting the elections. Hillary got a lot of money, so did Trump. But Trump himself was a very rich man. If he didn't get the money, he didn't care. But the third point is that I think these 545 Lok Sabha members, wherever they are fighting from, if it's from Ahmedabad or Bombay, let the Bombay people fund them. Let the companies fund that party there in their local constituency. Why should all India pay to the parties? Why should the all India people pay for the parties? Why can't they have local funding? And why don't we form a local, like you have Niti Aayog, we should have a Niti Aayog for electoral funding, a separate funding box. And that election commission should give the money equitably to all the parties. I don't understand why we can't do it. And if the Prime Minister says that no, this can't be done, that means there's some dishonesty somewhere going. We need a Niti Aayog. We need a Niti Aayog.
When you are right, madam, that at least your second part, that is the proposal that when you collect in the state funding, there is an alternative proposal that all these companies donate to National Electoral Fund. And there you don't have to worry that some party will come after me, because you are giving it to a fund. It will be administered either by the Election Commission or any other neutral party, because the formula which I suggested, you get one vote, you get 100 rupees. So there is no discretion at all. Even a clerk can run this scheme, because it's just arithmetic. For every vote, 100 rupees. So this distribution can be done very easily. And his presentation showed that 68% of European countries follow this system. If it can work well in Europe, why will it not work well in India? Why are they not even looking at it?
We should demand such a system.
Ma'am, the only issue I have is that your US example is possibly less exciting, because the US is a high expenditure election process. And elections, actually I've shown a slide where Mr. Gopinath Munde said that in 1980 he spent, what, 9,000 rupees? Huh? 9,000 rupees for his election, but in 2009 he spent 8 crores, right? So things have become expensive. Now, expensive why? Because you have 20 lakh voters. You need to communicate to them who you are. Why are we seeing so many celebrities in politics today? Because those people don't need to be able to, spend money to be known, right? So political parties go all over and keep recruiting the film stars and the sports stars, because it's so much easier to get people to attend their rallies and everything else. Their costs of participation come down, of publicity go down. But otherwise, for Mr. Modi's rallies that take place across the country, those are humongously expensive affairs, and everyone's for that matter. But the basic point is, why? Because just renting a stadium, the arrangements there, everything else costs a lot of money. If you're flitting around from place to place in a private plane, that costs a lot of money. But today, things are quite perverse. Voters won't show up for the rally unless they're paid transportation and biryani or something like that. People and maybe some extra cash. What shall we say? Then the other point is that a lot of this money is going to buy votes. It's reached that level, and once it reaches that level, which it has in many states, there's no bottom to that pit, because each year the demand gets more and more. So if the demands get more and more, then the corruption levels in the larger system will get more and more to be able to feed that black hole.
But isn't there a capping of expenses to be spent by each party?
May I answer that? Yeah, that's the point I should have mentioned. Expenditure in election and fundraising are interconnected. When you spend crores, you have to raise crores. If the expenditure could be capped. One was the issue which was raised by Professor Gowda, what is the rational limit for expenditure? Nobody has told us what they think is the rational limit. 70 lakhs is enough or not? Some communist parties say 70 is too much, we can't afford. Others say 70 is peanut, let it be 2 crores. So let there be consensus, we don't know. The other thing is there should be a cap on political party funding. Now he cannot spend more than 70 lakhs, but his party can spend 20 crores on him. So that makes a joke of expenditure ceiling. Now, if there is a cap on political party spending also, as we have in UK, so immediately now last general election 30,000 crores was spent, because parties had that much of money to spend. Bring it down that he can't spend more than 70 on his Lok Sabha election, and his party cannot spend an equal amount. That's it. Suddenly the 30,000 will come down to 3,000, 4,000. So why can't they look at it? They're not looking at these reforms. 40 reform proposals have been pending of the Election Commission with the government for the last 20, 30 years. Now some 2-3 other reforms are now being pushed. Those 40 reforms are not being looked at. One thing which Suchindan had mentioned, and it is mentioned in his summary and conclusion also, I would like to mention that one reform which will be encompassing everything else is about the Election Commission itself. The most powerful election commission of the world has the most defective system of appointment. Government of the day just appoints anybody. I came from the same system. I should not be complaining, but even when I was CEC, I said it in my TV interviews that I would have felt stronger if leader of opposition was also signatory to my appointment. And even an occasional finger ke Quraishi Congress ka appointee zarur favor karta hoga, although I have maximum enemies in the Congress, because we charge sheeted so many of their MLAs have ministers. But that would have disappeared if a collegium system was. We have a collegium for every big and small institution. CIC is not a constitutional body. CVC is not a constitutional body. For them we have a collegium. Director of CBI is not even a body. He is a head of a government department. For him there is a collegium, leader of opposition, Chief Justice of India, just for a head of a department. Now the most powerful body which can really play havoc with the country, Election Commission, there is no collegium. The government of the day. And to say that all 17 or 20 of us have behaved ourselves, that's a miracle. But hope can never be a strategy that we hope they will continue to be honest. Hope is no strategy. You have to have institutional check. And institutional check is that there should be a collegium. And one leader of opposition has also signed that they cannot say, for instance, attack on Jyoti these days. लीडर ऑफ ऑपोजिशन के सिग्नेचर तो ज्योति को भी लोग गाली नहीं देते क्योंकि गुजरात से आया है तो जरूरी क्या होगा या नहीं क्या होगा मैं उसमें नहीं जा रहा लेकिन द फैक्ट ये उठती है बिकॉज सिस्टम ने वो वीकनेस प्रोवाइड की हुई है दुनिया का सबसे आसान सिस्टम अदरवाइज आपको हैरानी होगी कि कितना कॉम्प्लिकेटेड तरीका होता है कि देयर इज ए पार्लियामेंट्री कमेटी जो 3-5 कैंडिडेट को सुनती है इन सम कंट्रीज देयर इज ए टेलीवाइज्ड नेशनल डिबेट कि 5 कैंडिडेट इलेक्शन कमीशन के लिए पूरी नेशन सुन रही है तो इतना वो ट्रांसपेरेंट होता है हमारा जिसको चाह लगा दिया बेनिफिट हम उसके रहे लेकिन हमें उसके अंदर से बड़ा डिस्कम्फर्ट और ये पॉइंट इन्होंने रेस किया है and I'm glad you should play it up. This if you can get one reform done तो 1000 चीजें तो इलेक्शन कमीशन के हाथ में है वो ठीक कर देंगे.
Some parties would be created only to get those 100 rupees out of that. In that case, the multiplicity of candidates will be there in the election process itself.
No, multiplicity of candidate का हमने इलाज ये किया कि we will give you post facto. आप multiple candidate बन जाए when you want to. It's a matter of detail. मैं तो इस एक्सट्रीम पे जाने को चाह रहा हूँ कि एक वोट पे 100 रुपए लेके चले जाइए. कितने बोगस कैंडिडेट आप हैं खड़े हो जाइए 100 रुपए लेने के लिए खड़े हो जाइए कोई बात नहीं.
Deposit भी है ना?
Deposit तो है.
Can I just ask the gentleman in the yellow tie?
Just one question. So, finance bill means which has not been passed in Raj Sabha. So, has anybody challenged this electoral bond?
Yeah, it's been
In court of
challenged.
law.
It has been challenged.
It's been challenged.
It's been challenged.
Sir, in case of election expenditure,
Once again, can you just raise your hands, please, and then stand up and answer? Yeah.
sir, election commission in case of any views regarding.
Well, one way would be, this is the simplest solution, just to have one limit for everything. Otherwise, you can say, this is the number of voters in this constituency, or calculation, it costs so much money to reach each voter, to send a postcard to each voter or something like that, and it could be based on the number of voters. But that would mean, each, it makes the system a little more complicated, but in principle, there's no problem with that.
No, let me tell you, let me correct him also. Actually, there are differential limits.
There are.
In, for 28 lakh for Vidhan Sabha is in the biggest state. But in the smaller state like Himachal and others, it is 16 lakh, 20 lakh. There are 3 different scales both for Lok Sabha, and that logic already exists.
I think we just take 2 more questions. Yeah, the little here.
I just wanted to know if there is any research or probing or finding on this aspect that money gets distributed, 100 rupees, 10,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, mass at a retail level to the voters. So is there any finding whether this money really helps, or is there an honesty, or is there a dishonesty, or is there a nonchalant attitude where I take the money and yet don't vote for the guy? Because from the guys who are contesting election, this is a serious problem. वो ये कहते हैं हमारा पैसा भी चले जाता है, वोट भी नहीं आता है. The second thing is increasing number of expenditure, quantum of expenditure, is going on to buying media or buying media space. So, and there again there is a dishonesty in media or whatever, embedded media and things like that. So
Paid news.
people are saying that biggest expenditure is this, and this is the new sort of monster.
Yeah, I can speak to that. see, you don't have studies because this is all illegal activity, right? So, but I can tell you some anecdotal stories. In 2004, that election, when I was campaigning, people would tell me that, what to do, sir? This party has given me, so many 100 rupees. It was smaller amounts then. And this party is also given. There are 4 votes in our house, so we're giving 2 votes here and 2 votes there. That was in those innocent days, right? Now, basically, every household will say to the political candidates, we've got so many votes, how much are you giving? They will shake down each candidate and then decide to vote for whoever they want. All right, so this what the issue is. It's just basically a festival, with Diwali, election time.
In fact, if I may add, actually they have better morality than the politicians, because if they take money, they actually vote for them. They don't cheat.
I don't know, sir. Not anymore.
Again, anecdotally.
Okay.
However, then Kerala is one state which has a very good model. When we were doing election in Tamil Nadu, Kerala at the same time, we went to Tamil Nadu first. Every political party said money is a huge problem, so come down heavily, do that. Next day we went to Trivandrum. When we asked political parties the same question, they said we have no problem. We were taken aback and said, how come you have no problem? You have 40,000 how many kilometer long border with Tamil Nadu, and on top of that you have petrodollars, you have more money. They said our voter is very smart. He will take, even if he takes money from X party, there is no guarantee he is going to vote for that. So political parties don't give them money. They know that this money is not going to influence his voting behavior. I think that is the model which we should follow. Once in an interesting meeting, Sri Ravi Shankar, with whom I was sharing it as, he said the same thing. भाई पैसे सबसे ले लो और जिसको चाहो वोट दो. तो उस पे somebody वो जो पानी वाले हैं क्या नाम उनका राजेंद्र सिंह, वो कहते थे कि साहब आप होली आदमी आप क्या immorality unethical चीज सिखा रहे हैं. हालांकि I think if you come to think of it, he was being very, very practical. The only way to teach them a lesson is to take their money and not to vote for them. They will stop giving you money then.
That's a good point. It's not worth giving anymore, but now they're all caught in this competitive payment. And so everyone is escalating, the demands are increasing. As a result, the impact on candidate selection also is there. So you only look for people with deep enough pockets to be able to pay for these things.
I just want to make a small point. I think it's also a cultural issue for us. Now, we recently had the Advocates Association elections in Bangalore. And you'll be amazed as to how much money is spent on campaigning. And this is not cerebral campaigning, it's booze parties, weekends after weekends, well before the elections. And if we are supposed to be the torchbearers of liberal thinking and honesty and so on, and this is what we're stooping to in advocates elections, then does that not reflect itself on a larger scale? I happened to be in Madras for my visa a couple of years ago when the state election was on. And when I was driving back, everything was obviously closed along the way. But every 30 or 40 kilometers you would see in a small gully hordes of people standing around a tempo and little boxes being handed out to them. And surely it was not Tahir Sadam being distributed. So I think there's something to be said about our culture as voters also. I mean, if we expect honesty, perhaps we should act honestly.
Yeah, just on the media spend, the moment a candidate is declared, you have hordes of media representatives showing up saying we have a package for you, right? And that is the whole story there.
I think one,
2, 3, just take them all.
Lokpal bill was passed at the back end of the UPA 2. And what happened to it? Will it help in any way in the electoral process? As it is
we can
concerned,
take 3
corruption.
questions together.
What is the status of the bill? Where is it?
And Lalit, you are.
It just seemed to me that all the panelists seem to agree that perhaps transparency must be a first order condition before we can even move to other discussions regarding how funding happens. But it seems also that political parties themselves don't want it. And we seem to be caught in some trap there, that they can be the people who change it, but they don't want it. So just going forward, I wanted to understand what can we expect? How can we expect transparency of political party funding in the future? and perhaps this is a question to Dr. Sondhi as well, could we expect courts to intervene, or can we see some mechanism by which parties themselves can devise a way in which they can, going forward, look at transparency, but let go of whatever improprieties have happened in the past? Is there some way that can happen?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Rajeev should answer this question, but as it seems, if the change doesn't come from within, then it has to come from without, and that's really where you go to the courts. And if you look at the trajectory of the jurisprudence in this area, often enough, common cause, for example, was it Kanwar Lal's case in '77? It has been court intervention that has nudged reform. But look, that reform is always going to be systemic, is going to be macro. At the end of the day, as I think we've all agreed, the devil is in the detail. And if that in-house sort of correction doesn't take place, this may create an atmosphere of change, but the actual change has to come from within, in my opinion. And that would need, the RTI case is a classic example in point. Why did political parties resist the RTI? I mean, it's $1 million question. Obviously, because there is more to hide than you would like to believe.
In fact, if I may supplement what Dr. Sondhi said, RTI case met with a standstill because the judiciary also doesn't want that transparency. Otherwise, this would have been decided by judiciary. But the first part of your question, whether court will intervene, in fact, thanks to the court, most of the reforms and the best of the reforms in the last 20 years have come from them. Particularly in transparency, political, whatever fund that you have. You have to, every candidate has to file 2 affidavits at the time of nomination. One giving his criminal background, all cases pending against them. Second, their and their families' financial status and everything. We know now who was a pauper before becoming an MLA and became a crorepati after 5 years, thanks to the transparency introduced by the Supreme Court. Best of the reforms are coming from them, and Dr. Sondhi, if you can persuade Professor Gowda, even in our appointment system to which the government is not yet looking at, the case is now 3 months ago there was a PIL, which is now before the Supreme Court, that the appointment of election commissioner should be through a collegium. So let that be on a faster track if that can be achieved. And after that, from commissioner to CEC should be automatic by seniority like a judge. I know because my colleagues and I lived there. Fortunately, I did not suffer from that complex. If looking over shoulder, whether the government is happy with my performance, will they elevate me or not? I somehow had that confidence that they dare not tinker with the seniority, because I had been told by my senior, Mr. V. Tandon, that in 2004, Mr. Vajpayee time, 2003 or 4, they tried to bring a CC from outside. Was somebody, some Prasad, who was a public cabinet secretary. Immediately, Mr. Krishnamurthy, whom you know, and Mr. Tandon said that they will resign. And the resignation of two election commissioner would have caused a commotion in the nation. Immediately, government backtracked. So, although so far the convention is that we get promoted, but there is no right. It's not automatic. Supreme Court judges, High Court judges, their elevation is automatic. So the two commissioners feel they are on probation, which is a dangerous feeling. They should not feel on probation from day one. They should be protected, and that is what is written in this paper. There should be equality of protection. And there is only historical reason for such an anomaly to have persisted, because at the time when Election Commission was created in 1950, it was a one-man commission, the CEC. So CEC was giving that protection not as an individual but as the institution. Now the institution is 3 persons. So that protection should extend to all 3. Their appointment should be same way, and their removal only should be through impeachment. There should be equality. That's one of the proposals in this book.
So how about some other additional checks and balances on the election commission, maybe parliamentary oversight or something like that?
For instance, what is the wrong with the working which through oversight you will try and achieve? Because actually, our power over the election process, these guys will start blackmailing us. Because we'll discuss. Fortunately, one great thing which is happening in India, We only 3 days ago there was an international conference and we were telling our international colleague that we are never denied funds, although it is budgeted, but never does the Parliament discuss our budget. That's very dignified of them. Otherwise, करने लग जाए इलेक्शन कमीशन ने पैसा मांगा देंगे, इन्होंने ये नहीं किया था, इन्होंने वो नहीं किया था, because half the MLAs, MPs के खिलाफ तो हमने cases register कर रखे हैं, तो वो तो बदला लेने के भावना हो जाएंगे. No, what is
Not having any prescribed collegium for appointments is the public service commissions, constitutional bodies, but no prescription on method of appointment, on qualifications, and ad hoc appointments take place, and the impact is very deep. There are dime and dozen cases on, including in the Supreme Court now, from Karnataka, dealing with what is very loosely called the KPSC scam. And that is a KPSC scam in examination, in interviews, in appointments. And a lot of that stems from this lacuna. And it's so ironical that constitutional bodies don't have this built in. Perhaps constitution makers thought that people holding constitutional office will be par excellence. But as Doctor said, it's been a happy coincidence maybe as far as the CEC. It has not been in some other constitutional bodies.
You know, you'll be shocked to know that in our neighboring Nepal, any 3 MPs can bring an impeachment motion against the Chief Election Commissioner or Election Commissioner. 3
In the new constitution.
in the new constitution.
Conflict of interest.
Madam is Election Commissioner of Nepal. 3. Imagine here, भाई 50 कर देते, 3 जिसको आपने नोटिस दिया वो फट.
Thank you. I think we are.
Yeah, no, there's some good things about election commission appointment.
आपका
Never
कौन?
mind.
What is your appointment process? Please again.
What happens is in Nepal, we have, there is a constitutional council which will recommend the name, and then that person has to go through a parliamentary hearing, and then after the parliamentary hearing, he has to take oath from the president. And the Constitutional Council has opposition leader. The Supreme Court Chief Justice will be there, the Speaker will be there, Prime Minister, 3 ministers of PM's choice, and Pratipaksh. So it's not, and you have to go through a parliamentary hearing.
Yeah. See, so tough for us. It's so easy.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we are really out of time. I want to thank all the speakers. They spoke very candidly and listening. I mean, some of them are holding offices still. And I think we've got some mementos. Lalit has got some mementos for the speakers.
Diary.
And we'd like to thank the India International Center also for giving us this conference hall. So it was in a collaboration with them we organized this function. So thank you for the audience also. It really filled up the hall. Thanks a lot. That concludes this session.